Vietnamese or French, but most spoke Spanish with various geographical accents he was beginning to be able to separate. He'd always been good with languages, but they bored him. Now that he had good reason to learn one, he was a whole lot more fluent than anyone guessed, but none of what he overheard made him feel better. The last 3 weeks had really sucked. His telephone didn't work. When he asked for someone to fix it, nothing happened. When he asked one of his teachers if he could use hers to call home, she backed away like he'd suggested sex on the desk. That was the day the two badasses swaggered onto the soccer field and stared at him, silently telling him that he was number one on their hit list. Something had happened 3 weeks ago. Lane didn't know what it was. He didn't know what caused it. All he knew was that he'd gone from being a student to something else, something that felt like a prisoner. So what? I've held my own with these two pendejos for 21 days. I'm nailing my classes, my room is always clean and neat, the teachers like me. Or they did, until 3 weeks ago. When Mom comes to visit, I'll just casually ask her if Dad has changed his mind and maybe I could come home for a week, or a few days. Even 1 day? Just a few hours? Because once I'm across that border, I'm never coming back. I'll live on the streets if I have to. Lane listened to the relentless surf and told himself that the waves weren't whispering, "Prisoner, prisoner, prisoner." But even that hissing chant was better than remembering the voices of the two thugs as they tripped him, elbowed him, kicked him. "You're ours, Pato. You're dead meat. We're going to sneak into your room, cut off your balls, and make you eat them." Lane shut out the sound of the surf and the voices in his memory. I'm not a prisoner. I'm not scared. Southern California, La Jolla, Saturday morning. The phone rang 4 times before Judge Grace Silva pulled her head out of the legal documents she was reviewing. Maybe it's Ted. Finally. It had been years since she'd cared about her husband, newly ex-husband, in any way but the father of her child. And if there was a persistent personal sadness that she'd failed in marriage, well, she'd just have to live with it. She'd worked hard to make the divorce and all the legalities entailed as civilized and adult as possible. For Lane. But she was real tired of getting calls at all times of the day and night asking for Theodore Franklin. Just because he'd kept his legal address as the beach home they'd once shared didn't mean he actually lived with her. "Hello?" Grace said. Senora," said a man's voice. "This is Carlos Calderon. I would like to speak to your husband." Grace didn't bother to point out that Franklin was her ex. If Calderon wasn't close enough to Ted to know about the divorce, she had no reason to announce it. "Ted isn't here," she said briskly. "And he hasn't been here in 3 weeks, which you damn well should know because you or one of your employees is called every day. Have you tried his Wilshire office, his cell phone, and his Malibu condo? Or his bimbo mistress?" Yes, many times." "Is it something I can help you with?" Grace expected the same answer she'd gotten for the past 3 weeks, a polite thanks, but no thanks. Instead, Calderon sighed and said, "Judge Silva, I'm afraid you must come to Ensenada immediately." Her hand tightened on the phone. As a judge, she was accustomed to giving rather than taking orders. "Excuse me? It is your son, Lane." "What's wrong?" she asked quickly. "Is he in trouble? He's been so good for the—" "It is not something to be discussed over the telephone. I will see you in 2 hours." "What's wrong?" she demanded. "Goodbye, Judge Silva." "Wait," she said. "Give me 4 hours. I don't know what the traffic will be like at the border." 3 hours. The phone went dead. U.S.-Mexico border, Saturday, 11 o'clock. Grace barely reached the border by the deadline. Traffic had been heavier than usual, which meant 6 lanes of stop and slow on southbound interstates. The good news was that the Mexican customs officials were waving people through as fast as they could. They might hate Americans, but they loved the Yankee dollar. The only cars the officials stopped held women worth staring at twice. The customs official in Grace's lane looked half asleep behind his $200 Ray-Bans. With a practiced, languid gesture, he started to wave her dark green Mercedes SUV through the checkpoint. Then he saw her through the open driver's window. He leaned forward, hand raised in a signal for her to stop. The same thing had happened to a convertible 3 cars ahead of Grace and 1 lane over. That one had held 2 California blondes out for a little sin and excitement south of the border. "Good morning, señorita," he said with a smile just short of a leer. Despite the polite words, his glance never got above her breasts. "And where in my beautiful Mexico are you going?" Anger snaked through Grace, a welcome vent for the anxiety about Lane that made her shoulders and jaw tight. As a teenager, she'd put up with enough macho male crap to last her a lifetime. She really wanted to teach this border cowboy some manners, but it would take more time than it was worth. Her grandmother Marta had taught her when to fight and when to duck. "You must come to Ensenada immediately." "Ensenada," Grace said through clenched teeth. She handed him her passport. Inside the front cover was a laminated Mexican Department of Justice identification card. The Mexican government issued the cards as a courtesy to American judges and other officials. The customs inspector's thick black eyebrows rose behind the cover of his sunglasses. He handed over her passport, waved her through. "Excuse the inconvenience, licenciada," he said quickly. "Bienvenido." Grace hit the Windows Up button and left the border behind. Sometimes she didn't know which annoyed her more: Mexico, where men assumed superiority over women and weren't afraid to show it, or the U.S., where men assumed the same thing, but the smart ones left it in the locker room. She wasn't a stranger to the problems of Latin machismo. She had a Mexican grandmother on her mother's side, thanks to the failed 1911 Magonista rebellion in Bahama, California, and a Mexican great-grandfather and grandfather on her father's side. She had Native American mixed with pure Mexican, as well as several Scots and a roving Norwegian dangling from the family tree. She also had an Irish-Mexican father and a Kazakh-Mexican mother, plus a pure Kazakh grandmother, refugee from some failed tribal revolt after communism hit the Asian steppes. Although bureaucratic types labeled her Hispanic, Grace considered herself the perfect all-American mongrel. Despite being raised from age 13 in a Santa Ana barrio by her Kazakh grandmother, Grace was always uneasy in Tijuana. Or maybe it was because of her teen years in the barrio that she disliked Tijuana. Didn't matter. She never thought about it, never looked back. That was another thing Marta had taught her. Larevo, the traditional entry into Tijuana, seethed with open-air sex shops, girly bars, and hotels that doubled as whorehouses or holding pens for illegal aliens heading north to the Promised Land. A single woman alone in Larevo was fair game, which was why Grace avoided the whole area by using the new port of entry at Otay Mesa. Avoiding Larevo took longer, time she didn't have but had to take anyway. Just one more price of being a woman in Mexico, a macho world. The Otay crossing took her down the avenue of September 16th, through the Zona Rio, past bank after international bank, classy entertainment centers, more banks, and enough upscale international stores to bankrupt a Saudi prince. Grace paid the glittering shops even less attention than she had the border guard. The brief, chilling phone conversation kept echoing in her mind. "It is your son, Lane." She turned onto the toll road that led south towards Ensenada and hit the accelerator. The big engine hummed happily. Air conditioning kept the sultry monsoon air at bay. There was nothing to do about her anxious thoughts except live with them. The cell phone in her purse chimed. She grabbed it, glanced at the caller ID window, and pulled onto the shoulder of the road. She didn't want to drive while she had a tricky conversation with the United States Senator. She punched the receive button and tried to sound cheerful. "Good afternoon, Chad. Or are you still in a time zone where it's evening?" Senator Chadwick Chandler made a startled sound. "Oh, yeah, that new ID thing. I keep forgetting that you've got a phone that gets past the usual blocks. For a second there, I thought you were clairvoyant." "I am," she said, careful to keep any edge out of her voice. "That's how I figured out you've been ducking my calls for the last week. All 5 of them." Chandler chuckled. In person, the laugh was engaging. Over the cell connection, it sounded like he was choking on the olive in his second martini. "I'm not ducking my favorite district judge," he said. Unlike you rich California kids with your horse ranches and golden surfboard.